Let's hop in the Wayback Machine.
Buckle up, we're going to 1980.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of In a Darkened Room. Today we're going to talk about the entire year of 1980. I'm Chris.
I'm Darren. And 1980, man, what a pivotal year in music history. I mean, we're coming out of the 1970s at a time when I think record labels and the public in general were really looking to for something different. You know, you had in the 70s, you had everything from the singer-songwriter, AM radio 70s pop hits that we've discussed before. Got into disco mode for a while. Then before you know it, punk came along. And, you know, in the middle of all that, of course, you had the classic rock era, probably the definitive music of that decade. So 1980, I think everybody was kind of looking and anxious, you know, what's going to happen now? You know, where is music going to go?
Yeah.
And when you look back at these years, it's really incredible. I think 1980 definitely was one of those moments that really set the plate for the entire decade.
That's very true. And in looking at the Billboard Hot 100 charts, you can really see where things are bubbling under a little bit.
Right.
That were foreshadowing what was going to come to the 80s, and some things that just broke out completely and started the trend. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the singles that came out. Let's start there. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, the first one that I wanted to bring up came out, actually was released as a single. It was technically recorded in 1979, but released as a single in January of 1980. And people can say what they want about the genre. It is a legit genre. It's been around now for over 40 years. It even predated this, but this was the first time most of us ever heard anything like it in what we call the mainstream. And I'm talking about Rapper's Delight.
Yes.
That, I mean, you talk about a song that was very ahead of its time, very inventive. First off, it was 14 minutes long. I think over almost like 15 minutes or 14, 20
right.
or something. And what they did was they sampled Chic, Good Times, and they rapped over it.
Yeah.
And it was a hit. It did chart. And like I say, it really was the beginning of rap in the mainstream.
Yeah. That was very common, you know, like in the urban areas back before the 80s.
Right.
You'd have a lot of setups where people would play records and someone else would rap over it, and it would always be, you know, a record by somebody else. So that was very, very common in the neighborhoods.
Right.
This is the first time we actually saw it come to the mainstream.
Exactly. And then, you know, not long after that, you had Blondie with, you know, doing Rapture.
That's
which
right.
had a rap section. And that was probably, honestly, the first time that, you know, white America heard rap in a song.
That's right.
So,
and it came to even more of the forefront when Aerosmith teamed up with Run DMC years later.
With,
right. With Walk This
That's
Way.
what kicked the wall down, literally. In the,
really
like
did.
the video and like what happened in the video, and then just music in the mainstream, generally speaking.
But the very beginning of it was right there in 1980.
That's right.
That's where it all began.
That's right.
Another song that came out that year was Pat BENATAR, Hit Me With Your Best Shot.
Wow. It's funny. I just talked about that song literally yesterday.
Wow, yeah.
And talking about how huge that song was and what a great moment in rock and pop.
One of the black eyes on rock music back in the 70s was very male influenced.
For sure.
A lot of females did not, you know, break through and see success.
That's right.
But you had heart.
Right.
But I think with Pat BENATAR coming out that year with Hit Me With Your Best Shot, that kind of opened the door for even more female artists to have success throughout the 80s.
Right, and she was a hard rock artist. It wasn't like she was trying to pretend to play, you know, later she became a little more diverse and crossed over the pop charts. But those early Pat BENATAR records are rock and roll records all the way through and through. So I think you're right about that. I think she was, it was very important at that moment for a female artist. And of course you had the Pretenders and you know, Linda Ronstadt, and the Pretenders, by the way, came out that same year too.
It did. It was their debut album.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that was a really monumental moment for female rock and rollers.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
sure.
Yeah.
You know, another thing I thought of too, and once again, 1980 really set the table for the entire decade as far as what was going to follow. And some trends lasted a few years, some trends lasted way longer. One moment that I noticed, and he actually brought home Grammy Awards at the time, Christopher Cross, when he did his debut release in 1980 with songs like Sailing and Never Be the Same and Say You'll Be Mine. All of these, and I'm leaving off a big one. There's one other one I'm thinking. Anyway,
Ride Like the Wind.
Ride Like the Wind. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very much. That's why we're a team.
That's right.
But that record I think was very pivotal in bridging the gap between West Coast soft rock AOR. Stuff that you'd heard in the 70s a little bit, like Gino Vanelli and Pablo Cruz and stuff like that. But it actually ventured more into smooth jazz areas.
Yeah.
And you heard a lot of records produced by like Quincy Jones that was paying homage to the sound of these records that were coming out of L.A.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and actually branching off from that, it had influence in the pop world and the R&B world as well.
For sure.
Because that year, George Benson, Give Me the Night, was also, it went to number 4.
Great song. God, what a great song.
So that basic sound of the R&B that you hear throughout the 80s, it's kind of formulaic, but it's a great sound.
Yeah.
The Quincy Jones influence, you really started to see that come out, and Peabo Bryson later, acts like that, had huge success.
Al Jarreau.
Al Jarreau's another one.
Yeah,
yes.
and I think it was one of those little moments where it was hard to distinguish between yacht rock, pop, easy listening pop rock, and like you say, the smooth R&B jazz stuff. It was all kind of living nicely together there.
That's exactly right.
And I think that record, that 1980 record by Christopher Cross, was very influential in that. The success of that record. I remember at the time when that came out, Christopher Cross said, coming out of the punk era, I think people were ready to just hear regular songs again.
Yeah.
Songs that people could relate to. So, yeah, I think that was an important moment.
That's so funny about newer styles of music when they're introduced. It seems to fragment the public.
Right.
The public will go one direction or another.
Right.
So Christopher Cross, as kind of an answer to the punk movement.
Right.
Like, well, this is something different. I think people want to hear this too. But punk also influenced what was about to come.
Absolutely.
MTV and New Wave.
When Devo released Whip It, it was a very important moment. Devo probably owed a lot of debt to groups like Kraftwerk.
Absolutely,
that came before them.
Yeah.
But this was done in a little bit different way. It was done more mainstream. Kraftwerk had really long songs at times.
Oh, yes.
Devo just got to the point. And I think that Whip It, the video was very influential. The song itself, the electronic keyboards and everything that was on there was very pivotal in swinging music in that direction for several years to come. And you think about a lot of the stuff that came after that as evidence.
A good question to raise on that. That came out in August of that year.
Right.
But before that, and it actually got higher on the top 40 chart, released in February, was Gary Newman Cars.
Cars, yeah. Great tune. I love that one. I probably like it better than Devo, in all honesty.
The question I have is, do you think that Devo would have seen the same amount of success if Cars hadn't preceded it and got people used to that electronic sound?
That's a good question. I think it set the table nicely, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So I think you could make that argument.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of artists kind of bubbling under too. They didn't make the top 40. That were kind of foreshadowing the coming of MTV. You had the Boomtown Rats hitting number 73 with "I Don't Like Mondays."
Love that song.
Yeah.
Bob Geldof, right?
Yeah, that's right. The B-52s, Rock Lobster, hit 55.
How can you not like the B-52s?
I know, they're great.
I love them.
Of course, Peter Gabriel, he'd had Salisbury Hill years before that, but Games Without Frontiers made it to 48, almost got to the top 40.
Right.
But ones that actually cleared the top 40 made it into the 30s and the 20s. At number 35, you had the Vapors with Turning Japanese. Very foreshadowing to the whole new wave MTV era. as well as The Clash, Train in Vain, bringing some of the punk sensibilities from the 70s into the 80s.
One of my favorites.
The Jay Giles band, Love Stinks, that kind of foreshadowed some of the pop new wave type stuff.
True that.
Coming in. And what else? I think that's all I wanted to mention.
Yeah, the KORGIS. How about that? Remember that band, the KORGIS?
Mm-hmm. Everybody's got to learn sometime.
Yeah. All of that stuff was kind of hinting towards, there were different kind of singers, and I think that's something that a point I was reluctant to make, or not reluctant, I forgot to make, regarding Devo. It was a different kind of vocal. It wasn't such a pop rock, nor it was more like a robotic type of voice.
Yeah.
And I think you heard a lot more of that as the decade progressed. So I think those are great points. Another, you can't mention 1980 without talking about this, and that would be the release. It's kind of a comeback because they had lost their lead singer to death earlier in that year. AC/DC's Back in Black. When Brian Johnson became the lead singer, and they released Back in Black. I mean, think about how much that influenced music for the next several years.
Oh, most definitely, yes.
Yeah, and I think it's similar, and we're talking about a different decade. I think the Black Album by Metallica kind of did the same thing in the 90s.
I would have to agree with that.
Yeah. So, but yeah, at that moment, produced by Mutt Lange, Back in Black came out of nowhere when everybody thought AC/DC would, may be done after the death of Bon Scott. And those songs still get played to death. Back in Black and You Shook Me All Night Long, and you think about all the music that came after that. The Def Leopards and the Quiet Riots, Rat, a lot of stuff. The foundation was built by Back in Black.
That's very true, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, kind of more into the AOR rock world, REO Speedwagon, Keep on Loving You. High Infidelity came out that year.
Yes.
And also Journey.
Yes.
You had brought up earlier to me Journey.
Yeah, I think,
Any Way You Want It, that's what you had.
Right. Well, I think that back when the Boston self-titled record came out in 1976, that definitely sent music kind of in a different direction. All of a sudden, these rock artists were looking for high-pitched male vocalists. You had Jefferson Starship go out and get Mickey Thomas.
Yeah.
And I think that was a direct result of the reaction to Boston. And then as the 70s progressed, Journey hit the scene with Steve Perry in 1978 on Infinity, Will in the Sky, Lights, and then Love and Touch and Squeeze in the following year on Evolution. 1980's Departure included Any Way You Want It, and I think that REO Speedwagon was probably the definitive AOR arena rock, as they called it back in the day, album of 1980.
Yeah.
There was no doubt that, as you call it, bubbling under, Journey was about to take the world over for a couple of years.
Yes.
And so 1980, all the signs were there that was about to happen.
Yeah, Keep on Loving You, ushering in the age of the power ballad as well.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah, so that, that's kind of a short synopsis of where music was at the beginning of the decade. And man, the 80s, what a fun time.
It was, yeah.
But you could really go through, and we forgot to mention this. There was also, and this happens every decade. A lot of people hate hearing this and hate discussing it. I don't. Country was very valid on the charts in the early 80s.
That is very true. I noticed that.
Yeah.
Look, I believe the biggest hit of that year in the country vein was Dolly Parton's 9 to 5.
Yep. Looking for Love came out that year too.
Yep.
Which was a big hit. So
I Believe in You.
I Believe in You by Don Williams. That's right.
Yeah.
So 1980 set the table for a foreshadowing of what was going to happen. Ronnie Millsap, a lot of stuff crossed over.
Yeah.
Terry Gibbs. Just
yeah.
So pretty much 1980 was a solid foundation for pretty much everything you were gonna hear in the entire decade. I can't think of one genre of music that didn't have a place at some point later in the decade that wasn't around in 1980.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
So man, what a year!
Great year.
So I think maybe we should let's pick our favorite albums from that year. What do you say?
Let's do it. Like 5 each.
5 each. Yeah,
Okay.
let's do 5 each. And, you know, this isn't necessarily albums. I mean, I was 9 years old that year.
Yeah.
So this isn't necessarily albums that I remember from being 9 years old. Maybe it came later. I discovered them as I grew older.
Gotcha.
But they were released in 1980.
Yeah,
And
fair enough.
So the ones that I pick are going to be more about, you know, maybe how it set up a particular artist to become superstars later.
Sure.
It changed their style.
Yeah.
Or it influenced music as a whole.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my picks. Do you want to start with them or?
Yeah, I'll name one. 1980 included the masterpiece, the wonderful last album for a long time from these guys, and I love it to this very day. Steely Dan Gaucho had Hey 19 on it, Time Out of Mind.
Yes.
You know, production-wise, it's just flawless. One of my favorite snare drum sounds of all time. And, you know, as Steely Dan progressed through the 70s, you listen, especially if you listen to those records in sequence, everything took another step sonically forward.
Yeah.
And Gaucho's not my favorite Steely Dan album, but it was definitely, you know, the last step in sonic perfection coming out of the 70s. So that's my first pick.
Okay. Well, my first pick would be Glass Houses by Billy Joel.
Love it.
Yeah. What I loved about this album, you know, from in retrospect to his career that came before that, it was a harder edge sound, like
Sure.
compared to Joel's other work. It was kind of like a response to the punk and new wave movements.
Right. I
Yeah.
agree with that.
Yeah.
And where Billy, I never felt got enough credit was, you know, Billy wrote all of his songs by himself. And I think there's something to be said for that. I thought he was really good at not really repeating himself. Now, I don't listen to Billy as much as I once did. There was a time when I was a young man that he was probably in my top 3 artists. I still love him, still enjoy hearing him when I do. You know, major respect for the guy.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's a great record. That's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it had You May Be Right on it, and Sometimes the Fantasy, Don't Ask Me Why, Still Rock and Roll to Me.
I love Sometimes
all
the Fantasy.
great songs, and
Yeah.
it would all songs that also set up the decade, in my opinion.
For sure.
Yeah.
Coming up next for me, I'm going to go with one of my favorite bands of all time, Rush, and Permanent Waves. I mean, this was the album where they kind of started streamlining things a little bit more, kind of left the sci-fi stuff out for the most part, started going more for the radio and shortened songs. You had Spirit of the Radio, you had Free Will. As you dove on into the album, you know, there was other songs that were more just to the point. Different Strings was kind of a ballad. So that record for me holds up very well. I think it was a major milestone in the career of Rush. And I've noticed that a lot of times when you have a band that makes their best record that, you know, the masses think is their best record, a lot of times the record before that hints to what's going to happen.
That's exactly right.
And I think Permanent Waves was that record for Moving Pictures. It was a very good prequel.
Yeah.
Kind of, much like we talk about, you know, what we're talking about 1980 was for the entire decade. So that's my next choice, Rush, Permanent Waves.
Yeah. All right, so that one flows nicely into my next pick.
Yeah.
Because this was their, I guess it was the second album as a trio.
Right.
And then there were 3 came out before this, but they really started to form their definitive sound and what would propel them into superstardom.
For
Genesis, they released Duke.
Love it.
Fantastic songs on here. It was a concept album,
Right.
which I thought was really, really cool.
Yep.
But yeah, hits from that, a Misunderstanding, and a minor hit with Turn It On Again.
Love it, though.
Yeah,
This is
but
good
the album
stuff.
as a whole, it's got your shorter pop-oriented songs,
Yes,
but it
it
still
does.
has some of the Genesis songs from their previous works, where it's a little longer pieces, you know, a little more progressive. You kind of get a taste of both, but they were really starting to find their way on this album.
I agree. Up next for me, we're still, you know, living across the pond, so to speak. Queen, The Game. Thought it was a masterful record that came just at the right time. You know, they'd made the jazz record, which was really great. I love all Queen records, and you know, but it kind of was getting a little bit weird, you know, Bicycle Race, and I love these songs, so I hate to even sound like I'm putting them down at all, but with The Game, they really hit the bullseye. It was the right album for the right time. Another one, Bites the Dust, just took the world by storm.
Oh man,
It was a massive...
that's to me, that's one of the best songs Queen's ever done.
I agree. I love
it.
It
Would rank high in my favorites.
I love it. And John Deacon wrote that song, and then the whole record is just so good. In retrospect, like Dragon Attack is a really great song. If you've never heard it, then you need to check that one out. But Crazy Little Thing Called Love was on there, which tore the charts up, and we're kind of focusing on what the mainstream type stuff right now. But Queen the Game would be one that I would say is one of my favorites in retrospect.
That's a great one.
Yeah.
And so my next one is by a band that we've already brought up, AC/DC, Back in Black.
Oh, wow.
But I picked this one because I feel like that this was their pinnacle, in my opinion. I'm not a huge AC/DC fan.
Yeah.
But this is one album where I'm like, okay, that's fantastic. I love everything on it.
Right. I mean, they were firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. I think
really were.
I think it's their absolute best, and that might be a common opinion, but so what? It's my opinion too. Yeah, it was the first album after Bon Scott's death.
That's right.
And but I mean, listen to the songs that were on here. I mean, Hell's Bells, Shoot to Thrill, What Would You Do for Money, Back in Black, You Shook Me All Night Long, Have a Drink on Me, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. I mean, I can put that album on, listen to it beginning to end, and not have a bad moment.
I agree. I agree. And then when you talk about influential albums like we discussed earlier, I mean, it doesn't get any more influential than Back in Black.
It really doesn't.
Once again, I'll go with an album that we previously discussed, an artist, I should say, that we previously discussed earlier in this conversation, Christopher Cross. I think people laugh at me, but that 1980 self-titled album is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
I think it is definitely a pop masterpiece. I overuse that word, I know, but it really is from start to finish. It even had an unknown at the time. Eric Johnson plays a solo on there.
Yeah.
And Christopher Cross was a great songwriter, great guitar player. He played the lead guitar on Ride Like the Wind. So he could play. And in hindsight, it is definitely one of my favorite albums from that year.
Yeah. All right. Well, my next pick is one of my all-time favorite bands, The Police.
Nice.
They came out with Zenyatta Mondatta.
Love it.
I always have to carefully pronounce that every time I mention it.
Yeah.
This album, of course, don't stand so close to me. They really started to establish themselves like, hey, these guys are the real deal.
Right.
Like, these guys are going to go far with this, and really started to, break out into the pop world in a big time. But Driven to Tears was on that one.
That's my favorite one.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That is definitely probably top 5.
That has a really great Andy Summers guitar solo. He doesn't play a whole lot of lead guitar in a lot of these songs, and that one, it's a great guitar moment.
Yeah. Of course, De-do-do-do-da-da-da-da was on there. I feel
a little bit nursery rhyme, but that's okay.
That's fine,
like
yeah. But a couple of my other favorites, Canary in a Coal Mine and When the World is Running Down. I love those songs too. So
I can't argue with that, my friend. And I guess my last choice for favorite album of 1980 for me personally is another one of my favorite bands of all time. I could certainly make the argument that this is my all-time favorite Cheap Trick record, but it's kind of hard for me to pick a favorite. But All Shook Up, it was one that on the charts didn't do as well as a lot of their other albums, but I've ran into so many Cheap Trick fans that is their favorite album. It was produced by George Martin, who produced all the Beatles stuff. Obviously, Cheap Trick were huge Beatle fans. There was a lot of strife internally within the band. Tom Peterson, the bass player, wasn't happy with the direction of the music and thought he could go solo and all this stuff. He wanted to sing more songs and stuff like that. So they had a falling out. He eventually left the band, and he ceremoniously made his comeback when Cheap Trick made their big commercial comeback in 1988 with The Flame and all that. But that's a discussion for another day. But 1980 and All Shook Up by Cheap Trick is certainly one of my favorite albums of all time. Songs like Stop This Game's on there, Baby Loves to Rock, Just Got Back, High Priest of Rhythmic Noise, one of the best ballads I've ever heard, and vocals, World's Greatest Lover. There's just so much cool stuff on there.
Absolutely, yeah. So I guess my last pick is going to be from Mr. Peter Gabriel. There was his third album. Some people call it Peter Gabriel 3. Some people call it Melt, but it was just self-titled.
Yeah.
And I think he was really finding his way as a solo artist after his departure from Genesis. It's been acclaimed as Gabriel's artistic breakthrough as a solo artist, and for establishing him as one of the rock's most ambitious and innovative musicians.
Yes, I agree with everything.
Yeah.
And you talk about a major influence on other artists. I remember in the 80s, I can't tell you how many times when artists would be asked to list their favorite albums or favorite artists that were out there, how often he would come up.
Yeah, you're right.
Everybody from Ozzy Osbourne to Ann Wilson of Heart, I'm just naming these off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Loved him.
Yeah, he's a creative guy. Of course, Games Without Frontier was on there, and Biko. But one of my favorite Peter Gabriel songs that probably be in my top 5 is I Don't Remember. That was also on that album.
I don't remember that one. I'm just kidding. No, I do remember. I love it. I love it. I love the whole album.
Yeah.
Great choices, man. This has been a good discussion.
This has been a great. So that's our favorite albums from 1980, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion about the influence that 80 had coming up.
Very important year
on the upcoming decade. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for watching this episode of In a Darkened Room. You can find the link to this episode's companion Spotify playlist in the description. Darren and Chris welcome your comments. You can leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments section below. Follow In a Darkened Room on Twitter to receive updates and submit your ideas for what we should discuss in upcoming episodes. Darren and Chris are also on Instagram, so give them a follow there as well. All of these links can be found in the description below. While you're there, be sure to click subscribe and ring the bell.
All right, it's random topic time, and what do you say we do a little trivia card today?
Let's do it.
All right,
we never know what we're getting into with these things. So
yeah, it's like a box of chocolates.
What do we got?
Okay, the category is the 90s.
Okay.
All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
And the question is, late 1990, what hard rock band had a top 10 hit with Cherry Pie? Oh, come on. Challenge us.
Give me that card. All right. Well, thank you for watching.
The answer is Warrant, by the way. That's the thing about this box. Is it's going to be some challenging questions, and some are just going to be something that everybody knows the answer to.
Exactly.
I don't care who you are, but that's the fun of the box. Every now and then we'll be challenged.
For sure.
All right. Well, we appreciate you guys watching our 1980 episode.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for more. We'll be back with another video soon. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.